Well, meantime, the Supreme Court has greenlighted the Trump administration's cuts to the Education Department to proceed as planned on dismantling it. Justices on the High Court saying the Department of Education can move forward with its planned layoffs of more than 1,000 workers.
It comes as the Trump admin is seeking to dismantle the department, the goal to eventually eliminate the federal agency altogether in an effort to return education back to the states. With that, we're pleased to welcome in now Education Secretary Linda McMahon joins us from the North Lawn. Secretary, welcome, and thanks so much for coming on. We'll just start with your reaction to the news from the Supreme Court, essentially allowing your department to continue on with the mission of shrinking it.
Well, good morning and thank you for having me. Indeed, I was very pleased with the ruling from the Supreme Court because what we did when we first came in was to take a look at the department, to take a look at what could have been, just too heavy in personnel. We weren't just trying to make radical cuts just to shrink the size of the department. We viewed it with exactly the right eye as I think an executive coming into a company to see what functions are needed, how many people we needed to do that, etc. So we're very careful in planning how those cuts were made, and I was very pleased that the Supreme Court did give us the ability to continue to do that and to operate the agency efficiently and to get all of the work done that we needed to get done to meet all of our statutory requirements. And that's exactly what we're doing, and we were proving that we could do it at the time when we got the order that we couldn't proceed. So we're very happy to now be able to do that work and to do it well.
President Trump took to Truth Social celebrating that ruling that we're speaking about with you now. I wanted to read it to you. He says, quote, "The United States Supreme Court has handed a major victory to parents and students across the country by declaring the Trump administration may proceed on returning the functions of the Department of Education back to the states." Now, with this great Supreme Court decision, our Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, may begin this very important process. The federal government has been running our education system into the ground, but we are going to turn it all around by giving the power back to the people. America's students will be the best, brightest, and most highly educated anywhere in the world. Thank you to the United States Supreme Court. So, Madam Secretary, there is a lot to break down in that and in what the president said. Obviously, a great deal of disappointment with how the education is ran in the country, but he talks about sending it back to the states. In your role, what does that look like for the states?
Well, clearly, the states are really the ones in charge of education at any rate. The federal government provides about 10% of the budget for education in the states. The states provide about 90%. But the federal government does distribute grant money through that Congress has appropriated, to the states. Our Title 1A funding, our IDA funding, all went out as planned. We're very happy that that money does get to the states for them to use. And so the states really decide the curriculum. They hire the teachers, they provide the textbooks and all of that. But what the federal government needs to do is to provide the grant money that does come to them in a way that's formulaic and not so much with the competitive grants where states have to hire grant writers and they have to monitor them and all of that. But the states would get the money and they would distribute it on a formula basis and take the regulation out of it. Teachers, for about every dollar that comes into the classroom, spend about 47 cents of that dollar replying, for regulation and compliance with regulatory environments. And so we don't need to have that. Let's let teachers teach. Let's let the money go into the states and educate kids.
Sure, let's improve
then I
those.
think we're going to see our scores go up.
That's what I was just going to say. Let's see those test scores improve. Let's get those reading rates higher and just do well, even on the international stage, improve our rankings there. Before we let you go, I did want to ask you about Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who issued a dissent to this recent ruling. She said only Congress has the power to abolish the department, but then she also made this very grim prediction, Ms. Secretary here, Madam Secretary. She said that the severe consequences for the country's students will be done by unleashing untold harm, delaying or denying educational opportunities, leaving students to suffer from discrimination, sexual assault, and other civil rights violations without the federal resources Congress intended. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the federal resources would still be there, but clearly the Department of Justice, with its Office of Civil Rights, would continue to make sure that our Title IX, our Title VI laws are upheld. And that's where that responsibility ultimately does reside. And that will continue. But our students will get a much better education because more focus will be on them and not on the regulatory environment. And I think that's what the president always says: the best education is that's closest to the student, with parents, with teachers, with local school superintendents who understand the needs in their states. And therefore, they will be developing the curriculum to work with the communities, to work with companies and industry, to make sure that we are delivering students to our workforce. And that's one of the things that the Supreme Court ruling yesterday allowed me to do, which is to work with other agencies and to sign agency agreements like we have done with the Department of Labor to make sure that our WIOA and workforce initiatives can be better administrated. Right now, before all of this, there were 43 agencies dealing with workforce development. So now we're going to consolidate it.
Right.
We're going to make it better.
Right.
And that's going to be better for students and for our workforce.
Speaking of consolidation, there are reports right now that you may be seeking the Department of Labor to take on more responsibilities currently held by the Education Department. Is there any truth to that, and can you elaborate on it?
Well, that's a little bit what I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago, and that is that we have now signed what's called an Interagency Agreement with the Department of Labor. Secretary Chavez de Raymer and I have had several conversations about how some of the programs that can be in tandem with many of the other workforce programs that the Department of Labor has. Now, the Department of Education will still have oversight over Pell Grants and the programs that we work on, but we'll provide some funding for the work that the Department of Labor will do. In essence, we've kind of contracted, if you will, with the Department of Labor, but this will be working together with the Secretary, and she and I are really looking forward to that consolidation.
All right. Looking forward again to positive outcomes for these students. That's really at the heart of it all. And for now, she keeps her job as the Education Secretary here, overseeing what remains of the department. Linda McMahon, thanks as always for joining us here on National Report. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.